Hey, how's it going? LI Flies Mike here, and today we're going to be tying a variation of the Hollow Flye, and we're going to be using some Ostrich Herl. As always, the full list of materials will be down in the description below. We're going to get started off using some Danville 210 denier flat wax nylon and some Gamakatsu SL12S big game hooks in size 4 rod. And we're going to make a lead keel using 0.025 diameter lead wire. Now you can skip this step if you'd like. I'm doing this because at the moment the only rod I have is a switch rod with a floating line. I do have a sink tip for it that I put on there, but unfortunately I need a fly that I can ensure that sinks quite evenly. So I'm going to put a lead keel on here. It'll also help it cast a little bit better as well, but you can feel free to skip this step. Now to make a lead keel, we're just going to take 3 strips of lead wire about 1/2 inch long and tie them in somewhere around in the middle of the hook shank. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie 2 more pieces directly on top of that and try and keep them the same length so we have an even platform to tie our material on. Now the whole thing with the lead keel, it's going to help the fly turn over. It'll also help the fly cast a little bit easier by adding some mass to the center of the fly. It'll also change the action slightly. But the main thing is when you are tying hollow flies and adding a lot of ostrich like this, with an intermediate line a lot of times it'll sink nice and quickly, but with a floating line it can sink quite slowly. So again, that's the reason why we're adding this keel here. In the future we'll be making a video on adding keels to flies and how it could potentially affect how a fly swims and casts, for instance. But now we can get started with the fly. Today we're tying an Ostrich Hollow. So essentially we're going to be tying a Bucktail Hollow Flye, but adding Ostrich Herl on top of the collars. So we're going to get started off by adding some white Bucktail and tying this on 360 degrees around the hook. And this will provide our support for our tented hackle tail that we're going to be tying. Now essentially I'm combining a Johnny King style kinky muddler tail, so we're doing tented hackle tied in 45-degree angle. This is just some fairly cheap Chinese saddle hackle, but again quite good for this sort of tail section. And instead of tying it perfectly flat, we're tying it at a 45-degree angle, and this will allow us to have a sort of tent to the feathers to where the water will catch underneath and give us some great action. So it's important you only do a couple, I guess, tight but not too tight to pinch the feathers. You just want to secure the feathers and keep the angle that we have. We're going to secure this much tighter once we get all the feathers where we like them. So next we're going to take some tan saddle hackle and do the same. I'm just going to make this fly essentially tan over white is the sort of coloration we're going for. And you can stop right here, but I have some grizzly saddle hackle that I'm going to tie on as well. I like adding some grizzly saddle hackle every once in a while, adding some barring to the side. Certain bait fish have that barring on the side, and grizzly hackle does a great job at representing that. I don't even know if the fish necessarily care, but I like the look of it at times. After we have the hackle where we like it, and we have the nice tent to our hackle, we can go ahead and just wrap forward, and now we can pinch our tail and secure this down, and this will stop the hackle from flaring out and ruining our tented tail. And then after we clean that up, we can go ahead and tie some silver flash in here. I like having some flash in my flies. I've been doing a semi-flash tail to a lot of flies recently. So I'm going to take a pretty healthy amount of silver flash and just tie this essentially like V-tie style, where it's tied on halfway and then I just fold it back on the opposite direction. And then what you can see we're going to do is then wrap our thread underneath all of the material, then wrap on top. Do that about 3 times, and this is something that Johnny King does in the kinky muddler. It not only will help prevent the tail section from fouling while casting, but it'll also give us a nice pocket underneath the hackle, and that water will hit the hackle and give us great movement. So now, just to have a nice transition, again, I do this on the Kinky Muddlers. I've been tying so many of them, I can't help but take some inspiration from Johnny King recently. So we're just going to take a little bit of Marabou as a transition point, and also to kind of fill in the space in between here and our next collar, which will be a hollow tie. And again, we're adding a ton of Ostrich Herl to this fly, so why not add some nice Marabou to this tail section and just get a ton of movement in this fly. The whole idea behind this fly is utilizing natural materials and just getting a ton of movement in the water. This fly really swims really nicely, and it essentially pulsates. You'll see normal hollow flies do that, but when we start putting Ostrich Herl on top of it, you can really see the effect of it. So just making sure we have the Marabou spread evenly top and bottom. We're going to go ahead and take some head cement on here and cover up our thread wrapping. Now we're going to go ahead and do our first hollow tie here. This is essentially a normal hollow fly. I generally tie my bucktail all in one shot now. I used to do different colors and stuff like that. I try to do like two-tone effects now instead. It's much easier to work with the bucktail, tying in one section, spreading it evenly. And the whole idea is we want to do very minimal amount of wraps. No more than 5 or 6 wraps in total. We just want to loosely secure it, spread it, and then we can tighten it down with a couple more wraps, and then we can fold it back. If you wrap too much behind the hollow tie, you can end up screwing with the hollow tie itself. We can use our fancy tool, our spool of thread, and fold this back and weave our thread through the material. And then all we do is we don't tie on top, we just wrap in front and we build a thread dam. Now I had some questions on like whether or not this fly gets crushed in a fly box. Bucktail hollow flies do get pretty beat up in a fly box if you put them in a way where they kind of are compressed. So if you can find a fly box that has some more room, it's nice. You can always wet them and kind of reshape them, but they are a very good fly. They are quite, even though it's just bucktail, they're pretty resilient and durable fly if you tie them right. So now we're just building our thread dam up, and this will change the profile of the fly. And you can see here, once I kind of want a little bit of a larger profile because in the water this will compress down. So I'm actually going to back the thread off, and you can see how just loosening or taking that thread dam back a little bit opens up that bucktail. So now the whole idea behind the Ostrich Hollow. Now, if I had long enough white Ostrich Herl, I'd probably use it for the tail, but I'm very limited in my Ostrich Herl selection right now. But this is like the perfect length. We want it to be just about the length, if not slightly shorter than the bucktail that we tied in. And now all we're going to do is just take a couple pieces at a time, maybe 2 or 3, and I'm just going to go around and tie them in essentially like quadrants. I'm just trying to fill up the hook shank. If you want, you can tie them one at a time and really get perfect even coverage, but I find it's easy just to take 2 pieces at a time, 2 or 3, and tie them in and cover up the hook shank 360 degrees around the fly. So we have this spring-loaded hollow tie bucktail, and on top of it we have this Ostrich Herl. And this Ostrich Herl is going to sit on top of that bucktail, which already has amazing movement in the water, and it's just going to add even more movement to it. So now something that's important, always take this is something I do every time, always take super glue and apply some to your thread dam, just to prevent your thread dam from slipping and also to make sure that the fly is durable. You don't want any super glue to get onto the material itself, just the thread dam that you built up. So now essentially we're just going to move forward here, and I took some tan bucktail and some white bucktail and kind of just loosely blended it, so that way we get a little bit of color variation here. And all I'm going to do is same thing, we just move forward, leaving myself a gap behind the hook eye to work with. I probably could have tied it a little bit closer to get a nicer taper, but still. We're just going to evenly spread this bucktail around 360 degrees. Again, a very loose amount, very small amount of wraps. and then we could just give it a couple more tighter wraps to secure it before folding it back. Now it's important when you fold it back that your thread doesn't catch those tag ends. If you cover your tag ends or you cut your bucktail perfectly, that's fine. I don't mind having the tag ends in there because it kind of fills up the profile of the fly. But when you fold it back, make sure your thread doesn't catch those tag ends. So if you've ever tied a hollow fly with bucktail and you've noticed you have those tag ends kind of poking out, that's the reason why. Unless you've tied it too sparse, where you don't have enough bucktail in general, which could be the case. But if you've added enough bucktail and you're getting in those tag ends poking through, it's because your thread caught it. So now you can see the profile here is pretty exaggerated. It's a little too exaggerated for me, so we're just going to build up our thread dam a little bit. But you can see I'm kind of pulling the bucktail back and kind of seeing where it's lying at times. We definitely need to build up more of a thread dam here, so I'm just going to wrap, slowly working back, and you don't want to wrap on top of the material. We're just essentially building a wall in front of it. The more thread we wrap on there, the less of an exaggerated profile we're going to have. And again, I want a pretty exaggerated profile because we are tying the ostrich herl on top. So it depends what sort of bait fish you're going for. Usually when I tie hollow flies, we're going for that classic sort of herring bunker profile, right? That medium to large bait fish. If you were tying this to imitate, let's say, something like a mackerel or a sardina, you may want to have less of an exaggerated hollow tie, for instance. So now for the last ostrich outer collar, we'll call it, I actually found some tan ostrich herl here. So I'm going to go ahead and tie a fairly decent amount. You'll see I'll tie some on top, I'll tie some on bottom, and just make sure I fully coat the fly here and just take my time. What you should do is try and use the least amount of thread wrapping as possible to secure the ostrich herl. Just 1 or 2 thread wraps. So that way we don't end up with a giant thread dam or a giant thread head at the front, right? And be very careful, we don't want to wrap too far back and kind of change the profile of the hollow tie that we just worked on. So we're just going to slowly move around, tying more ostrich herl on, and just checking the profile of the fly every once in a while. Now this ostrich herl is going to help fill up our profile because we're just essentially tying more material on top of the hollow tie. So this will affect the shape of the fly, so it is something to think about. So that's why you do see me pulling that material back and kind of taking a look at it at times. But really we're just trying to get a full even coverage of the fly 360 degrees with ostrich herl. And you only want to tie a couple pieces at a time, but I mean you can see we're ending up with a fairly decent amount of ostrich herl. But these are definitely sort of like the blend out flies, right? You could just fish regular hollow flies, but sometimes you want to look in your fly box and you're looking for that one fly that almost has that golden light shining on it when you open it up. And I feel like these sort of flies are like that. Put a little bit more extra time and effort and material into something like a hollow fly, but so again, just slowly adding some more ostrich herl, filling up the profile here. So you could probably just tie these in single colors, all white, all pink, all black, all purple, or you could do the two-tone effect where the rear section is a lighter color and the front section is a darker color. But this is sort of the traditional darker color on top, lighter color on the belly, right? Which is always a classic sort of baitfish color. Now we're looking pretty good here. We're starting to come together. Now, if you have something, some sort of natural eye material like jungle cock, you can always use that. We're balling on a budget over here, so we're going to use some tab eyes. These are 1/4-inch tab eyes from saltwaterflies.com, and I just trimmed them down slightly so we don't have too much of a tag end. I don't like having the tag ends stick out, so I kind of tie them a little bit closer, but you can feel free to tie them in however you like. Now what I don't recommend doing is gluing any eyes onto the fly or using UV resin or anything like that. Really the whole reason, you'd rather leave the eyes off completely instead of changing the profile of the fly by gluing something on there. So you could feel free to just leave the eyes off, and the fly looks so good without it anyway. But of course we like to make the flies look pretty here when we're doing tying tutorials. So now we're just going to apply a little bit of head cement here to the thread dam that we built up. Make sure this fly is durable. And there we go, the Ostrich Hollow. A viewer recently during one of our live streams here on YouTube asked us to tie one, and beautiful looking. I tied a beautiful pink version that flew off my tactical angler clip. But so I figured it was time to maybe do a tutorial on this fly, and I recommend checking Rody on the Fly out on Instagram because he gave me some good inspiration looking at some of his flies to tie this up. But thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this fly. It's a fantastic pattern. Give it a try if you have some bucktail and ostrich herl. And like I said, you could check out our other hollow fly video. Don't feel intimidated. Just give hollow flies a try and just break out some bucktail and give them a shot. Well, my name is Mike here from LI Flies Mike. We have new fly tying and fly fishing videos coming out every week. We have live fly tying on Fridays, as well as early access for members. Well, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. Hopefully you have a great season out there this year. Till the next one, tight lines.